Good morning. Welcome, everyone. We're going to begin the symposium. This is the Symposium for Personal Control of Genomic Data for Research. We welcome all of the people who are here present in the Mazer Auditorium at the National Institutes of Health campus, and we welcome all of the folks who are on the webinar and listening in from far and wide. My name is Debbie Wynn. I'm the Acting Director of the Division of Cancer Prevention here at the National Cancer Institute, and I'm going to be giving you a bit of an overview of how some of the early progenitors of this symposium today. So I'll be talking about the Cancer Moonshot program, which is really a collection of research projects undertaken by the National Cancer Institute, as well as other parts of the National Institutes of Health and some other federal agencies. So the 21st Century Cures Act was passed in 2016, and a presidential memo at that time established the programs that Congress had laid out for us, and they're collectively called the Cancer Moonshot. And what they're all about is to accelerate progress in cancer, including prevention and screening, from cutting-edge basic research to wider uptake of standard of care. It's also to encourage greater cooperation and collaboration, which was noted that the absence of that was hindering science and not enabling acceleration. So it was encouraging cooperation within and between academia, government, and the private sector, and to enhance data sharing as well. NCI was given the task of figuring out how to implement this particular public law, and it developed a scientific research agenda by a blue ribbon panel of scientific experts and others who formulated a series of potential opportunities, and they identified about 10 or 11 different opportunities. They also, as they were developing these recommendations to go forward that NCI would implement, they wanted to reach out to the rest of the scientific and public to provide opportunities for the public and experts to have ways of inputting ideas, to increase the public's participation in the Cancer Moonshot, to convene meetings, communities for open scientific meetings. That led to a repository of over 1,600 ideas that the Blue Ribbon report generated by the panel had at their to consider. And there were listening sessions and professional conferences, and some of these activities we've continued throughout the process of the Cancer Moonshot, with professional conferences, listening sessions, opportunities to inform the public and get input from the public. I'm going to talk. This meeting was generated by one of the recommendations, and that was for a network for direct patient engagement. That recommendation noted that many patients are eager to provide their data, and gathering this information in a linked network of databases would enable more precise knowledge about what works in whom and which types of cancer. And another thing that the Blue Ribbon panel stressed is that efforts to reach minority and underserved populations will be a high priority. And that's certainly the case in a conference like this, where we're talking about personal genomic data, where it's important to consider that not all people at this point, for sure, have access to genomic data about themselves, and there are a lot of barriers to obtaining that information, either about your germline or what you inherited, as well as from information about the tumor if you're a cancer patient. So the NCI staff generated a number of initiatives that we felt would address this particular recommendation, and I'm not going to talk about them all. I will mention today, just mention briefly, the participant engagement in Cancer Genome Sequencing Network, which is a couple of bullets down. That is an effort to use, it's a request for applications for grants from the National Cancer Institute that involves promoting and supporting direct patient engagement in related activities in high priority genomic sequencing projects, such as those involved in gap areas like lethal cancers or rare cancers. You're also going to hear a little bit about the Moonshot Biobank, I think, tomorrow. I'm just going to give you two quick examples. My part is a pediatric and young adult rare tumor network that is focusing on rare solid tumors affecting children up to young adults. It engages wide communities of patients, advocates, researchers, and clinicians. It includes a natural history study with the hope that these can lead to future clinical trials. The investigators here at NCI host multi-day clinics that bring patients from all over the nation to meet with expert clinicians. They host workshops that bring scientists together with clinicians, advocates, and regulatory professionals. A second initiative. This is not going forward, so I'll try page down. I'll try going backwards. No. Okay. A second is a portal to support participant engagement projects. So this is going to be a tool that we're developing that would be a gateway and a portal into Cancer.gov, and it would allow patients to search and filter across individual projects that they might be interested in participating in, and it would have secure engagement, secure account and logins, lay summaries of study resources. It would enable participants to direct information to the research projects and to get a return of results back. So there are different cancer projects that might be part of it, such as my part, and the tool would allow investigators, as they're setting these things up, to enable the tool to collect dynamic online consent, return of patients could get return of their information and results. They could receive information about clinical trials that are matched up with what their characteristics are, and allow for communication. So just in summary, the Network for Direct Patient Engagement is part of a larger set of Moonshot activities. These activities are funded mostly by NCI through grants and contracts to investigators across the United States. These efforts address the Moonshot goal of accelerating cancer research involving genomic sequencing, patient engagement, return of results, clinical trial participation, portal and other tool development, and health disparities. They're intended to enable study participants and advocates to be partners in the design, conduct, and governance of the projects, involve two-way interaction between study participants and researchers, and recognize that researchers are the stewards of the data and biospecimens entrusted to them by study participants. And I've given a link for learning more about Moonshot projects. So now I would like to introduce our next speaker. That's Dr. Sean Davis. He's a cancer researcher here on the NIH campus, and he's going to be representing the organizing team that developed this conference. So thanks.
So good morning. Thanks, Debbie, for the great introduction. As you can tell, the Cancer Moonshot Initiative is a fairly large, long-running initiative, and it's really focused on accelerating cancer research and accelerating our ability to help patients. I'm here to give you the 5-minute overview of what the next day and a half is going to be. This meeting comes out of something that is quite interesting to me to think about. I'm going to come back to this in a second. The Gartner Hype Cycle. How many of you have seen this before? So this idea of having some kind of technology trigger where the visibility and the excitement about something peaks, then we drop into this trough of disillusionment where stuff isn't working the way we expect it to. It's not changing the world the way we thought it would. And then finally we enter the slope of enlightenment and finally come to a plateau of productivity. And I think if I polled the room about where the idea of personal sharing of genomic data is, we'd get everything from it hasn't even started to we're at the plateau of productivity. Probably not that far. But the point is, I think we're going to have a lot of different opinions in this group. And what we really wanted this particular meeting to focus on, which is potentially a little different than other NIH meetings, NIH convened meetings, is we really want to have the patient and patient advocate perspective. So now my job is to give you the details, the internet, NIH guest wireless. I will say that I'm not responsible for the NIH guest wireless, thankfully. It usually works, but you sometimes have to connect a few times. The WebEx for people online, if you have problems with WebEx, there is an email here. For folks online, feel free to reach out. We'll deal with those as quickly as we can. We're also, because we have a very large online audience, we're going to use this application called Slido. And this allows people online and in the room if you want to sign up. You give your name and you can ask questions. The way this is set up typically is that we have a number of panelists speaking. We'll have very short questions, if at all, and then we'll move on to a panel discussion later. So as people are speaking, feel free to type in your questions, and then that allows people online and, again, in here to vote on them. And what we'll try to do is to go back and forth between the audience participation, audience questions, and questions from Slido to the speakers. Here's just a little outline of how to use the system. For folks in the room, Building 10 was at one point the largest building dedicated to clinical research on Earth. It's 2.5 million square feet. I encourage you to check it all out. Not really. So we're at that circle in the bottom. If you head out these doors and keep going straight, you'll end up in the new clinical center, and along the way you'll pass coffee, restrooms, the poster presentations, and the FAES conference room. And for those of you who have kids, there's a gift center in the main clinical center. Mission here, we wanted to convene a meeting to understand the landscape of personal genomic data. When we started thinking about this two years ago, I'm not sure that any of us were aware of the fact that this was ongoing. This was happening in real life. People are getting personal genomic data from direct consumer. They're getting it through clinical testing. They're getting it through research testing. So this meeting has evolved over time. The conversation is not starting here. It's very much ongoing. We want to facilitate understanding and community engagement. In the room here are patients, patient advocates, clinicians, representatives from government, industry, national academies, etc. And we really want people to rub elbows with each other. So I'd encourage you, when you leave between sessions, to try to introduce yourself to 2 or 3 people that you don't know. That's a major outcome of this. We want to focus on patients and research participants. And we've asked patients and we've asked people to give their personal stories in many cases. And for people who are going to even be giving more research-focused talks, a lot of them have personal stories. And it's really important, and you're going to hear this echoed again and again, that patients feel that they're not always included in the way that they'd like to be in both research and in clinical care. So we're trying to help give them a voice here. Goals. My main one is networking conversation. That seems like a soft goal, but it's pretty important, and it's the way things actually happen on the ground. Is people decide that they have a shared vision and shared needs, and they can move things forward. That goes along with opportunistic partnerships among participants, including the audience. All of you in the audience are participants from my point of view as well. The same thing with the online audience. We want to educate the audience, myself included. And we want to introduce thought leaders, advocates, and early adopters to the research community. So there are going to be a lot of NIH people roaming in as the day moves on. And we're really trying to put a lot of these thought leaders, people who have been early adopters in various data sharing, personal data sharing approaches, to introduce those to the communities so that you get a chance, the NIH people get a chance to learn what they've learned. The goals that I'm not looking for. I'm not looking for consensus. If anyone in here thinks that we're going to come to a consensus about any of this stuff for the next day and a half, you might think about leaving because it's not going to happen. I'm not looking for a one-size-fits-all solution. We're going to hear about lots of different approaches, lots of different things that have worked, and we're going to learn some things that haven't worked. We're not trying to design or develop use cases for NIH to build something to share personal data. That's not a goal. And we're not focusing on technology alone. In fact, we're going to focus a little bit on technology, but my main concern is to understand what drives people to share their own data, what are the barriers to that, what are some of the downsides, legal protections. We have a fairly broad set of things that we want to accomplish, but building something is not one of them. Outcomes. I'm sorry, this is actually really hard to read. We're going to provide videos of this meeting, including the discussions. We're going to have detailed notes that are being prepared as we speak. We'll provide a summary document at some point in the relatively short term after the meeting. And finally, my hope is to raise awareness, build community, and perhaps even establish some new partnerships. So, again, I'll leave a detailed slide up here. If you want to join the Slido conversation, it's PSD 2019, and that is not Pumpkin Spice Day, just so you all know. Starbucks can leave us alone. The Twitter hashtag is a little bit long, but once you use it a couple times, it pops up. We have a poster session that's going to be literally a 2-minute walk out the door here. There are 14 or 15 posters. And we have seating available for around lunchtime right near the posters, seating for about 100 or so. So that's a great place to convene for our extended lunch of about an hour and a half. At this point, if we have questions, feel free to reach out to one of the organizing committee, and we're going to go ahead and move along then to session 1.